we've got 100,000 people coming into London, which is probably realistic, if we were to ban an entire protest, how do we police that with, say, 3,000 police officers? To ban that many people, to stop them getting into central London, that's a phenomenal task.
Steve Hartshorn, I just want your response, first of all, to what we've heard from Suella Braverman this week and what the grassroots, the rank and file, are saying.
If it's in relation to the comments that the Home Secretary has made, then it's incredibly difficult for my colleagues sometimes to separate what's being said at a very political level and government level between what happens operation on the ground. Now, my colleagues want to be policing these protests fairly, independently, to uphold the law as laid down by Parliament. But sometimes it feels difficult to get the balance right when we've got one side saying one thing and then my own commissioner, my boss, who's saying, no, actually, we've got it right. We've got the ability to do these protests safely. So there will be some concern on the ground.
It sounds like, in a way, there might be some sympathy amongst some in the grassroots with what she said. Is that right or not?
It's difficult to come up on the sympathy angle. Obviously, everybody's entitled to an opinion. But for me, it's if the Commissioner is saying we can police this event peacefully, safely and lawfully, that's how we take our steer as police officers. We're there to uphold the law. If things change on the interim period between now and then Sir Mark Rowley feels that things need to be changed, we will do that.
Do you think there might be some officers who are sort of scratching their heads as to why there hasn't been a ban of these marches then?
Quite possibly, and I think that's perhaps a deeper concern digging into politics of what is party politics, what does the law say, and if you take it back to, as a police officer, I might arrest somebody, we go to court, there's a defence team, there's a prosecution team. There's always two sides to every story, and until that result was delivered, often we don't know until we get the final result from the jury, so it's incredibly complex. We sometimes get judged by hindsight when we're trying to deal with things in the heat of the moment. And I would say we get it right most of the time. Sometimes it goes different to plan. And that's what the court's there to test it, to make sure we do it properly.
So there's confusion amongst some in the rank and file about what they're allowed to do this weekend, what they've been given permission by their by the high-ups in the Home Office, and what the Commissioner himself is saying because there is this tension.
I don't know if confusion's the right word. Maybe concern around... You look at the Public Order Act, Section 12, 13, 14, which gives people the powers, the abilities to protest, march and gather. Everyone can put their own spin on what is a march. How many people makes a march? Is it 6 people? Is it 1,000 people? If things get banned, it's incredibly difficult to police certain events. We need the cooperation of the organisers. I'm reassured by the things I've seen and heard that they want it to be peaceful. I just hope that everybody gets involved in the right frame of mind to keep it peaceful.
Let's just explore a little bit more deeply what the Home Secretary said in her article in The Times. She pointed out that senior Metropolitan Police officers took the knee after the Black Lives Matter protests. There's this issue coming up about this decision not to ban pro-Palestinian marches, and yet she says lockdown protesters were, in her words, given no quarter. Is there any merit to the idea that there is a double standard in policing?
I'd respectfully disagree, and my colleagues are out there trying to do a complex job, and we're told that neighbourhood policing is at the root of good policing. If you're dealing with people in front of you and you feel that's the right thing to do, notwithstanding we're there to act impartially without fear or favour, if that builds a communication with those people at the time and diffuses tensions, that has to be a choice they make. And it's very easy to stick to one line of saying we must never do that. That's easily made in policy, but when you're at the front line, at the coalface, dealing with these things, it's incredibly hard sometimes to remember what the official line is, what you want to do. Morally and ethically, you try to do the best thing you can within the law to get it right for the people you're dealing with at the time. So some people may well have sympathy with the sentiment, but again, it's policing are being drawn into things that are sometimes beyond their pay grade.
But when officers are confronted with, banners calling for Palestine to be free from the river to the sea, chants calling for jihad, what might their reaction be to those sentiments expressed?
Sometimes an understanding of what the law says and what the law permits. Again, there's two sides to every story, and what can be to some people a very innocent placard banner, to others is very inflammatory. And it's about getting it right, because if as a police officer I'm deployed at the weekend and I see things in front of me, I'll naturally want to take a course of action to try and diffuse those tensions. But sometimes by doing that, by breaking the rank to go and intervene on something that may cause something else to happen, and it's that sort of consequences and cause and effect. We need to get it right. We need sufficiency in numbers to make it safe for everybody to have their view. But again, it's that wider balance. It's just because people aren't seeing arrests made in the heat of the moment doesn't mean to say they're not being followed up with further inquiries. Everyone's got a camera, everyone's there recording things, feeding it into the police, demanding we do something. We have to get the balance right. And there's the at the time policing, and then there's that post-event policing, and things will happen afterwards, which may not make the news, but it is being done. And again, it's an incredibly difficult balance to get right for everybody, because a very popular phrase at the moment, policing, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. We want to get it right for as many people as we can, but also keep things as safe as we can.
So what would your advice be to your officers to get that balance right?
It's about being professional, being understanding of people's views. It's incredibly hard sometimes to be restrained when you've got people shouting very hurtful and hateful things, demanding you do something. Stick to your core values of policing, stick to your training. If in doubt, speak to supervisors. Resist the temptation to act perhaps emotionally to what might be a very technical subject. Do the best they can and get the public to accept that we will make mistakes. Sadly, colleagues will be injured this weekend trying to do the right thing. They'll be caught up in conflict which isn't of their making. We're there to keep both parties separate and safe over both days. And it's important that, again, if the public can understand, we are there to be impartial. And just because we don't act because someone says you have to arrest somebody doesn't mean to say we're taking a particular side. We're trying to weigh up an incredibly complex situation of the law, public safety, concerns, and trying to defuse it as much as we can so everybody can go home safely at the end of the day.
And should your officers listen to the Home Secretary or the Metropolitan Police Commissioner?
We're there to uphold the law. We have to do what the law says. And for me, as a disciplined service, we will apply the law as best as we can at that time. If the Commissioner is saying there isn't sufficiency to prohibit any kind of march or action, I have to take that at face value. However, if something comes in tonight and that changes it, and then he says, well, we can now prohibit or ban certain parts, that's the way that policing will go.
Ironically, isn't it now, after all of this controversy and furore, that the risk of violence following the Home Secretary's comments might mean that that threshold to ban the march under Section 13 of the Public Order Act, that might be met now?
Possibly, but again, that's why we've got, I believe it's an extra 1,000 officers coming from around the country to help my London colleagues who are there. They're all being pulled from their own communities this weekend. Some will have their rest days cancelled. We're there to provide that safety. And again, it's the practicalities of policing. If we've got 100,000 people coming into London, which is probably realistic, if we were to ban an entire protest, how do we police that with, say, 3,000 police officers? To ban that many people, to stop them getting into central London, that's a phenomenal task. So it's about managing expectations, ongoing dynamic risk management, by allowing people to gather and protest. And I believe there's a couple of miles separation between the two. That's a very fine balancing act that if you prohibit one, do you set a standard that you've got to prohibit everything? There is this great right in this country to protest democratically. As long as you do it safely, it's a hard balance to get right.
But do you think there is still a possibility that that march might get banned, or is that ship sailed now?
Again, it depends on the information, intelligence that comes in between now and when it takes place. And obviously if things happen...
It's not too late to ban that march.
It's not, but again, if we ban it, if people have made plans, some people will probably have already travelled down from other parts of the UK to get here overnight. What do? They're already in London anyway. And again, what is a march? What is a gathering? What's a demonstration? It's a very fine interpretation that we have to get right. Sadly, I think mistakes will be made, well-intentioned mistakes on both sides. Some people will cross the line thinking they're within the law. And hopefully by talking sensibly, trying to defuse it as much as we can, because that's what we told as police officers, defuse, de-escalate where possible. That's our job. We're trained professionals to do the best we can, but it's that public understanding of it's difficult.
Because of the intensity of this argument over the last few days, what are your fears for what's going to happen this weekend and the kind of situation that police officers are going to be in?
I think, sadly, my colleagues will be injured. I think there'll be too many who will be going there this weekend who will come away with injuries. Some will be hospitalised. Hopefully not. Members of the public will be caught in it. They'll be injured and damaged. I hope people go there for the right reasons, not to incite violence or hatred. That doesn't solve anything. All it does, it makes it a sensationalised protest, which then stokes the fires on both sides. But no one should be injured over these. These should be lawful, peaceful protests to raise and valid concerns from people of either side. But I want it to be safe. But I don't want my colleagues damaged in any way, shape or form, because then they're taken away from policing. They can't return to their own families safely. They're not there to police the communities they've come from. So everybody loses.
The Tory party has always traditionally been the party of law and order. Have the comments by the Home Secretary made Britain less safe, made the capital less safe for your officers and for the general public this weekend?
I think that's one for the public to answer.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, it's difficult. I've got to be very careful because I've got to be apolitical. You know, as a police officer, I'm not allowed to have any political bias whatsoever. The public tell us what they want. Hopefully the MPs that make the law, form the law, apply the law, will get it right and tell us what needs to be done. I want a government that's consistent in their messaging to the public, but also to provide the operation independence for local chief constables, for the commissioners, so they can do the job they're entrusted to do and do very, very well on a daily basis.
But if those comments hadn't been made, would life have been safer for your officers and for people in the capital this weekend?
Difficult to say, because if I listen to what some people are saying, that they are inflammatory and have caused problems, and of course it may have made things more difficult. But by the same token, as you've articulated, some people are saying there might be some sympathy with those comments, so that might de-escalate if there's a reality. You know, and we can talk about, let's have an honest conversation with people. Great if we can, but that honest conversation doesn't elicit a genuine understanding of what the other party is saying, because people refuse to accept despite some really good evidence. So it's a fine balance, and it's trying to get it right all the time. I think policing does a good job. If everybody can try and calm down, let policing does what policing does best. You know, in London, we have a fine tradition of hosting demonstrations, protest events every single day, every week, and have done for decades. We largely get it right. And it's that public understanding. We need the time and space to do it properly without anybody inflaming it for their own gain.
The Home Secretary needs to calm down as well?
Again, that's for the public to comment on.
And just finally, how would you characterise relations between the police and the Conservative Party now? Traditionally very strong. How would you say relations between your officers and the government in power now are?
If I was to look back over the last decade, obviously as the Police Federation of England and Wales, we've been incredibly disappointed to see that initial loss of 20,000 police officers. Then to told we're getting 20,000 to come back in as an uplift. It wasn't an uplift, it was a replacement programme for those that we had lost. But coupled with that, in the last year, the last figures to March this year, 2023, just over 9,000 police officers left the service. So we're at the point of having a constant uplift to replace those that have gone. I'd say it's been strained. I've been calling for long-term funding for the police now ever since I took office over 18 months ago. Something similar to the NHS. We need it. Chief constables need that ability to plan properly. Recruitment has gone so far, but what about retention for people that are coming to the end of their service that want to be retained in policing? It's that, again, consistent message that have other people stood back in the last decade, not supported our calls for long-term funding, better recruitment, better training, better kit, better equipment, more police stations. It could be argued that they've been complicit and silent in that, but it's all too easy to blame policing for some of the failings. Yes, we have got issues within policing. We've addressed those. Look at right care, right person. We're saying we aren't the best people to deal with mental health, and it's absolutely right that the right people help those that need it the most. So I think policing is evolving, never more so than now, especially on international politics. It just gives added pressure that everything seems to be a priority, but then nothing is. And it's those competing demands that my colleagues have to deal with on the public.
There's this particular row frayed an already quite tetchy relationship with the government.
Frayed and tetchy. I mean, if I'm only alive to some of the events because of the job that I do, so I have to get involved in these conversations. Do most police officers take note of what's being said on mainstream news? Possibly. Does it affect them at the time? Maybe not. Again, it's what's their frame of reference? Where did they get the news from? Is it social media? Is it mainstream media? Is it from policing? The minute you put the uniform on, certainly if you're out there physically policing the protest, you'll have a really good briefing. You'll be told what to do. You try not to let any of that interfere with your professional capability. It's hard not to sometimes become involved in thinking, well, here's what the Home Office is saying, the government, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, but here's what the briefing and the senior officer is saying. But again, you try to walk the line of you do it the best you can at that particular time to help people. We want to get it right. You know, policing's a vocation. I'd like to think no one comes into policing for the wrong reason. Sadly, we know that some do, but that's a really small minority that you speak to any police officers at these events over the weekend, they'll hopefully give a very professional, balanced view of why they're there, what they intend to do. And it's a difficult job. I'd encourage anyone to try it. You know, join up, if you can't do it full time, become a special constable, get involved, see how hard it is, and people will understand it more so. Have a chat with a copper and you'll see the great job they do.